then with our new administration coming in, things have changed. So I'm here to give an update. I'm pretty informal. Once I start sharing my screen, I won't be able to see you all. So feel free to unmute, ask questions. If you want to ask them in the chat, that's fine too. Sherry, would you or someone monitor that and just interrupt me? Okay, let's see if I can do this. Technology is always one of those things, you know. And are you guys seeing? Nope. Let me try that again.
Seeing the side, the main page and all the slides on the side.
Yep.
That always happens to me. I'm very familiar with that.
You know, it's always one of those where it's like, are you kidding me? Now let's see if this works. I want to share this screen. Can you see just the slides? Yes, brilliant, which now means I need to put, yay, there we go. And my notes, the most important thing. It's gonna be really hard to talk to you all. Okay, shifting things around. So here to talk to you this morning then about the overview of the federal impacts on the local food for schools and childcare work. Here's where we are heading a little bit. I'll talk about local food for schools and childcare at the federal level, I'll give a little overview of what it was, what happened to it, and then we're going to talk about Vermont's response, because Vermont's response has been pretty incredible. And it would be remiss of me not to talk about this within the global context of other food security initiatives and topics that are occurring within our state. And you will probably, it's perfect that other people are coming after me because you will probably get some of those legislative details as well. But our real view around this, and when I say our, I am a facilitator of the Vermont Farm to Early Childhood Coalition that is nestled within the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network. And that network collaborates with and extends its work to the Farm to Plate food security roadmap. So again, different parts of us are looking at different parts of nutrition security, but we're all partnering together. So hence kind of this a little bit of expanded talk today. And there's been so many shifts. I know you all know this, that this is today's context. It could and likely will change tomorrow, if not next week. So keep that in mind as we continue to talk about this stuff. Okay, so a little bit about what the Local Foods for Schools and Childcare program was really all about. And actually, the federal government back in 2022 established a program called Local Food for Schools. It ran for the 22-23 and the 23-24 school year. It was administered, it was funding that came from the federal USDA, went into our Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets at the state level, and then was supporting schools at the time, only schools, to purchase and access local foods. So this particular funding stream from USDA, it supported schools, it supported our local agricultural community, it put dollars back into our Vermont economy. It was really the ripple effects from this were pretty significant. And over those 2 years, the Agency of Agriculture chose to use food hubs as the mechanism to get local food to schools. And so our distribution systems were ramping up and changing. So a lot happened in those first 2 years, and it was highly successful. Vermont drew down all of its funding, which some other states didn't. Again, this was a federal program. It went out to all states. In October 2024, USDA announced under the Biden administration that they were going to expand both the financial monetary amounts, but also the program to childcare. And it was childcare at the federal level to those operating the child adult care food program. So USDA also oversees the child adult care food program at the federal level. And so programs had to be enrolled in that. So what did this mean for us? In January, our Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets actually entered into a cooperative agreement with the USDA to access $1.2 million, just over $1.2 million for the local food for schools and childcare. This was going to run for the 2024, 2025, and then part of through 2026 school year. You can see here, just under 950,000 was designated for schools and just right around 280,000 was designated for childcare, again, operating the child adult care food program. And in Vermont, we hover right around 32%, 33% of our programs enrolled in the child adult care food program, which again is right around 300 programs. That's just to give you a scope of how many programs that could have accessed this funding to help with their food and nutrition services. Part of the process around this was that the Vermont Agency of Agriculture had to submit a plan, which is where we were. They had brought partners together. They were talking about the implementation, still accessing food hubs, but expanding that to include childcare potentially, but definitely for schools, expanding the number of food hubs that could be incorporated. And then we were still in the planning process for how it would roll out specifically to childcare, especially family childcare enrolled in child adult care food programming. What this meant, to sort of put this in scope, what this meant though was that the Agency of Agriculture, because this federal funding was coming down, they had to make some tough choices about their capacity. The one thing I will say about the local Food for Schools childcare program is that it never came with administrative funding for anyone anywhere. It was all about the funding is going directly to the food. Food hubs could use it for some distribution, but it was really going to the producers primarily. So the Agency of Ag elected not to roll out their current state level farm to school and early childhood community supported agriculture grant, which I've talked about here before too. That is a grant that goes directly to early childhood programs in Vermont, again, to access local food. That program has sort of annually operated around 50 grants awarded to early childhood programs, and that was open to either CACFP folks or non-CACFP participating folks, and it was about $45,000 a year. So when you think about those administrative burdens, like I totally understand if we were talking about suddenly $277,000 versus $50,000, and we're talking about 300 programs versus 45 to 50 programs, they elected to not operate the CSA program this year for 2025. The sort of resulting piece about that is that when this program, so in March, then the USDA notified all states that it was terminating their cooperative agreements under the Biden administration and not releasing any funding. So what that means for early care and education programs is we won't have access to that federal funding. This year only, we won't have access to the CSA grants. And, again, all of the systems that we're ramping up to put this all in place have been obviously spending some money and getting ready, and both our producers and our food hubs. And so there's great impact on kind of like the negative, the void now that's left in this wake. I think I've mostly covered everything here. One, I think, really important piece that I want to underscore about the fact that this local Food for Schools childcare funding is now no longer available at the federal level is that there is no current threat to child nutrition program operations at the federal level right now, either the child adult care food program or the national school lunch, breakfast, child nutrition programming. We know things could change at any point in time. And I think it's really, really important to know that CACFP for early care and education as it is right now isn't expected to change. It also means that we were hoping that there would be additional investment in the child adult care food program in particular, but the national school lunch and breakfast programs and summer meals, and that's highly unlikely now, but at least as of right now, nothing has been cut. All right. So Vermont's response to this was really swift, really organized. I think, Vermont has a long-standing history with farm to school. In fact, it's the Patrick Leahy Farm to School Grants Program at the USDA federal level that is where some of these cuts are occurring. So, we have a long-standing and national history with supporting farm to school. And so our partners really came together and said, what is going to be the impact and how many systems are going to feel the ripple effects of this cut? And then what does it mean, at the coalition, the Farm to Early Childhood Coalition, and my level, really thinking about, so what does this mean for early childhood programs as we've been trying to build out nutrition security and nutrition service options for Vermont? So our Farm to School and Early Childhood Network immediately set up a landing page. It's linked here. If folks want to see it, I can grab that and drop it in the chat a little bit later because I can't gain access to everything. But I'll drop that in the chat. It has a landing page. It really tells like what's going on, what the current status is, and ways to take action. Our Vermont legislature, again, we have a state Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants program that is administered through our Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And so our agricultural committees were incredibly invested and really interested in what the lack of this federal program now meant for Vermonters, school children, early childhood, and of course the agricultural committee. And so in late March, several of us from the network were requested to go testify in front of the House Agricultural Committee. And so Gina Clitheroe from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets was present. Kayla Strom from the Farm to School and Early Childhood Network participated. Becca Perrin, who is a food hub account manager with Green Mountain Farm Direct, so part of the food hubs, and then I was the fourth person really sort of lending a voice to the early childhood system and what this would mean for us. And really the result of that then is that the legislature is really interested right now in developing and designing a one-time fiscal year 2026 state appropriation to mitigate some of the impacts of this loss. So of that 1.2 million. Which is incredible, frankly. Like, it wasn't our ask. We were going in to define the impacts, and several different legislators, again, and committees are very interested because this farm to school and local purchasing really has many, many deep ripple effects for Vermont, our economy, our local producers, and the like. So where we are right now is that Senator Ingalls in the Senate Appropriations Committee was very interested in sort of getting some draft language. What could this look like? What would this mean for Vermont? And so we are in the process. It's happening this week, actually, that we're supporting a $1.2 million general fund. So again, Vermont general fund dollars request to sort of backfill, if you will, or mitigate the impacts of losing the $1.2 million from the feds. It is one-time funding. This is not something that we're anticipating would continue in any way, shape, or form. But again, our food hub distribution systems, our local producers, the ripple effects and the multi-millions of dollars that are going to impact these other programs and other systems is pretty significant. And I think that's where our legislature is really looking at how this type of program really impacts multiple systems and multiple state economies. So that's where we are right now. Is there a question? Okay. That's where we are right now. Again, the way that this is like literally in development this week. So what does it mean? It says it's Vermont local food for schools and childcare so that we don't confuse it with the federal program that went away. So this is, again, state general fund dollars, one-time funding only for 2026. The money will still be routed through our Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, potentially, if we're successful. And it'll go through sort of on the farm to school and early childhood grants line item, but it could be administered separately, so it doesn't have the same kind of strings and navigation challenges. Again, because it's one-time funding, we wanted to make this as approachable and easy to get out the door as possible. Right now, eligibility, we've purposefully kept this broad. So whereas the federal administration was definitely around child adult care food program only, early childhood programs could participate. We've kept the language broad. However, there's still the administrative oversight and challenge of distributing to 300, going from 50 programs to 300 programs for 1 year of funding. So how the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets chooses, again, if we're successful, to administer this is left open. But we did want to create some open opportunity in language and sort of set a precedent that we want all early childhood programs to be able to access local food and have support for that. And then the other piece that I talked about quickly, which will tie into something in just a minute, is that I noted earlier that the federal local food for schools program did not carry any administrative funding whatsoever. So all of that administrative capacity at the state agriculture agency was in kind money for all of their staff to do this work. The same thing with our food hubs, with our schools. It would have been for our early childhood programs, right? Like there wasn't any money to offset any of the administrative costs of this. It went to the food, which was great for our producers. However, the state funds, again, we've left that open in case that helps facilitate, particularly, I think, distribution. The Agency of Agriculture isn't interested in taking any administrative funding for themselves. They've been very clear about that, but we know that the systems themselves, connecting schools, connecting the food systems, and connecting early childhood might take some additional support. So just to note that that's where we are right now. Again, all of this could change. And then where we are right now, we are ensuring, so Senator Ingalls has this language. He's with the Senate Appropriations Committee. Different partners are providing testimony. We're reaching out to the broader, so again, there are multiple rings. I sort of set that up. We're reaching out to the broader food security network and coalitions with Farm to Plate and the Food Security Roadmap, and trying to look holistically at the slate of legislative asks, and really trying to remind folks that these are mutually reinforcing aspects that sometimes target slightly different either populations or sectors, but that they're all comprehensively supportive of nutrition access and nutrition security in the state of Vermont. So we'll see what happens with state appropriations.
Cynthia?
Yeah, jump in.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to follow you, but I need a clarifying question.
Please, there's a lot.
I'm not sure I heard you right, so I just want to ask a question. So the federal farm to school program has gone away. Is that forever, or was that for a year? I forget.
Right now, under this current administration, it would be permanently closed.
Okay, permanently closed. Okay, I had that question. And then my other question was, you talked about with the Vermont program having language, so all have an opportunity. Do you kind of have like an example of like how you're thinking that, what that looks like, or
how that would roll out? You mean, Sherry, if the funding becomes available?
Yes, you said
Sure.
that you were being intentional about, trying to increase maybe opportunity. I was just curious what that like.
So those of us who are trying to plan for the federal administration of this, our initial thoughts, we were very early on in this, but our initial thoughts were to think about, so larger early childhood programs would potentially have the opportunity to purchase through local food hubs, just like schools did, because they're a little bit bigger and have a little more purchasing. Family childcare homes, we definitely wanted to create the opportunity, and it was challenging to try to figure out, would this look like an expanded community supported agriculture grant not a grant, but an allocation? Would it look like a farmer's market sort of coupon? Like we have a couple of models in Vermont that we could really sort of pick up and introduce for family childcare to better right size. Food hubs were pretty clear that they would not be able to reach all early childhood programs. So those are the kind of models that we've been thinking about, but we've also been thinking about, are there other opportunities to network with a program like WIC? And they already have EBT cards. And so what would an EBT card to early childhood family childcare look like, but using this type of funding? So we're trying to be creative and innovative in how we model this. And I think it's all up for debate, and we don't even know if we have the funding yet. So
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
That really clarifies it. And Matt has a question too.
yeah, Matt.
I do. It's actually a clarification. Good morning, Cynthia.
Good morning.
So Senator Ingalls is actually chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee.
Sorry.
He is not on appropriations. However, I just, because the magic of the building, I was in Senate Appropriations when he walked in to Appropriations and said to the chair of the committee, Senator Perchlake, "We're working on it." You know, so it's, and he started talking about
Thank
this
you.
program. So it's just a small technical correction to your explanation. There's no question the legislature is engaged on this. So, but Senator Ingalls is in the Senate Agriculture Committee that is the primary place where this discussion is happening right now.
Yes, thank you, Matt. I'm sorry. I should have said Senator Ingalls is bringing it to the Senate Appropriations Committee. So my apologies. You're absolutely right. Thank you. I do appreciate that. Any other questions? Okay. Then I will just wanted to sort of set this in the context then, again, sort of thinking of our sort of ripple effects and those who are involved. The Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network, I said we have that landing page for the local food for schools and how folks can take action. That, of course, that particular network is also nestled within the National Farm to School Network. And the National Farm to School Network is also working across all of the states and all of the federal delegates to try to figure out how to mitigate the impacts of this and what this could mean for the nation as a whole. Because it was, I think, $660 million across the country for local food producers and schools and early childhood. So on our website, again, I have all of these different links. When I get a chance to drop them into chat, I'll probably just drop the network landing page because they will have all of the different links for this. But the first opportunity is Speak Up for Local Food in Schools and Childcare. This is a National Farm to School Network link. It takes you right to an opportunity where there's just a really quick, fillable, like, here's the story, here's my email, here's where I live, here are my delegates, and the process, if you will, the tech takes your story and sends it off to the appropriate people. So again, federal delegations really need to have stories in their back pockets to share with other states. And I will say our federal delegation has been amazing and really responsive and supportive of this work. And I think definitely networking with their colleagues at the federal Congress to figure out, again, what can be done about this, if anything. The next opportunity is really share your story, Vermont. And so this is from our network, our Farm to School network in Vermont. And we're really trying to support a variety of systems folks who might be impacted by this to tell their story, both with our federal delegates, but also with our state legislature. So there's a link, again, a fillable Google form about how to tell your story and what what the impacts are for an individual early care and education program or a farmer or a school. And then the final one is really around reaching out to Vermont's congressional delegation. And again, there's a link here. It shares tips for how to reach out to your congressional delegation. I think this is helpful. While this is certainly set up for local food for schools and USDA and some of those impacts, I think the tip sheet is really pretty fantastic for any type of outreach we want to do with our congressional delegation. There are lots of topics, as we know, impacting states and state legislatures right now. So I just want to let folks know that that resource is there as well. And then finally, nestling this one more ring out sort of in a broader nutrition security package for Vermont, I would say in particular. So this is really Vermont-based. We have several different policy asks right now around nutrition security, again, all mutually reinforcing to one another. In particular, Hunger Free Vermont. Keely wasn't able to be here today, so she asked me to mention this. But Hunger Free Vermont and partners currently have an ask to our legislature for $182,000 in base funding to support the Child Adult Care Food Program sponsor organizations so that they can continue to support family child care homes enrolling and accessing the Child Adult Care Food Program. This is pretty critical. Vermont only has 3 Child Adult Care Food Program sponsors for all of family childcare, and sponsorship is the only way that Vermont family childcare programs can access the Child Adult Care Food Program. And there's very little to no administrative funding within the current CACFP system. So our sponsor orgs are doing this out of the kindness of their heart in most cases, or for very, very little funding support. So this ask is to try to stabilize those sponsorships so that the federal program is even accessible to Vermont family child care. Currently, this request, as I understand it, the latest information I had from Keely earlier this week is that it's in Senate Ed right now. Keely is our touchstone for this. Again, she happens to be out right now, but she will keep us informed as this particular issue moves forward. And I do understand, I know it's on the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance legislative list as well, agenda as well. Hunger Free Vermont is also, so this is at least new for me in this context here with this group, but Hunger Free Vermont is also leading a potential opportunity that could connect nonprofit, that's really clear, nonprofit universal pre-K, so private universal pre-K, and school food authorities for a potential universal school meals project. So what does this really mean? Let me try to develop this. It's actually very exciting. And it's just getting started, but it is another avenue to consider how we get nutrition services and food access for very young children. So with the passage of Vermont's Universal School Meals Bill, there is an exciting opportunity that allows for nonprofit universal pre-K programs to be eligible to receive free meals from schools if the school food authority can establish that program in a meal site under the National School Lunch Program. So lots of word jargon there, essentially, but what it really is saying is the schools would help administer and operate their sort of program as usual for the school, and they would be feeding nonprofit universal pre-K approved children, and those meals could potentially be free under our current policies and the way that they all align. You know, again, this is an amazing program that the state of Vermont has stood up for school-aged children. And I've said from the get-go that our coalition is really seeking, like, how do we support early care and education system and programs to access food and have nutrition services. We know nutrition is so important for all kids, but for really young kids. And so this is an opportunity to think about our policies for the K-12 system and try to apply them in an appropriate way for early childhood. Hunger Free Vermont is currently seeking interest both from nonprofit early childhood universal pre-K programs and from school food authorities. And so they have a Google interest form. Again, I'll drop that link afterwards into the chat. But if you know of any universal pre-K programs or school food authorities, if you happen to have a child in a school system or anything else that you want to investigate, sort of those combined collaborations, please send out the link. We would love, Hunger Free Vermont is really looking for, and again, it's an interest survey to gauge what's the interest and how can we start creating linkages between early childhood and our school food authorities for nutrition services. And then finally, which is probably pretty good timing, because I see we're wrapping up here. I just wanted to nestle that all of this work is really occurring and linked and connected to the Farm to Plate, much broader Vermont not farm to school, Vermont food security roadmap. And so again, several of these different legislative asks and certainly farm to school and farm to early childhood in and of itself are nestled within some strategies that help identify how we can better support food and nutrition security for all Vermonters across all age groups. So just wanted to mention here that, you know, again, I have already mentioned it, but we are in communication with our partners. Those are folks like the Vermont Food Bank, Hunger Free Vermont, I already mentioned. Certainly the Northeast Organic Farming Association. So just, again, all of the partners within Farm to Plate and really thinking about the full package. And Farm to Plate has a 2025 policy slate. Again, you will see some of these various asks thinking about all of the systems involved. And while it's certainly been difficult to sort of coordinate with all of the federal changes regularly occurring and disrupting us, we've really been working on how do we provide sort of that unified message that all of these strategies are really important, and it's not a competition one way or the other, but that they actually mutually reinforce one another. They mutually reinforce different components of our state systems and economies. So just to keep that in mind, the partners are working on this. And again, things change daily. So we're really trying to get that message out that, you know, there's support across the board for all food and farm security asks in the fiscal year 2026 budget. And so again, that's kind of just how these different initiatives kind of nestle and rest within each other. Questions about
Cynthia,
that?
there is a couple of the committee members are wondering if there's like a information blurb that they could send out through their childcare networks about the UPK opportunity.
Yes, yes, there is. Great question. And I can stop sharing. The rest is just my contact information. Yes, there is a blurb. I will get the Google interest form into the chat right now. There's also on Hunger Free Vermont, they on their website, which I didn't pull up yet, but I can certainly take a peek at that and make sure that I pull up their interest components, their interest component, their blurb to share with everybody. Sorry, see, I can't multitask. Any other questions?
Any other questions that was great, Cynthia. I know, and you're so good with your timing, like perfect, just about to
Good.
the end. And just
Well,
enough room for that was really helpful for me to really get it, all of that just described in a very succinct manner, because there's just a lot happening and I was feeling confused. So I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through the state of things today.
I really appreciate the time, honestly. Again, things are changing, but I think the baseline is that this will impact early childhood programs and their nutrition services. So I know we're going to get an update on Act 76 too, and you think of anything that could potentially happen there, and it just is one more potential loss for our system that is a little scary. So thanks for the time. I appreciate it, everyone.
Yeah. All right. We're going to shift to the next part of our agenda. and spend most of the rest of the time on getting sort of the legislative updates from our advocacy partners. And also there'll be time for members of the committee and those of you attending the meeting today to share any updates or questions that you have. And we're going to start with Matt from Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance. Then we'll shift to Let's Grow Kids and Vermont AYC, and then have Martha with BBF. Anna is on vacation this week, but Martha's going to sort of round out the discussion with updates from BBF. So I'll throw it to Matt. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thanks. It's a pleasure to follow Cynthia's presentation, and same spirit here. A lot of information. Going to try to go through things pretty quickly so that there's plenty of time for other presentations. And I just put a link in the chat to our website where there's more information, and you have a chance to digest things at your own pace. So first, the usual preamble and disclaimers. So I'm the executive director of the Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance, happy to be partners with BBF, but this presentation is not in any way intended to imply that BBF supports all these things or that you all support all these things. We just offer this as for informational purposes only. And if you'd like to participate more, you can do so, or you can just listen whenever you wish. So there's no implication here that there's any formal connection between the Alliance and BBF in terms of what we are doing. I'm going to go over a brief summary of the status of the issues on our 2025 legislative agenda. Each of these issues has gone through our process that begins in the fall. Each issue has a lead organization, and this is essentially their campaign that we are supporting in a secondary way. So except for CIS, I'm not the best contact person for this. And in fact, some of these issues you'll hear more about shortly when you hear the update from LGK and Vermont AYC. So I'll just very quickly run through these issues. I'll go through them all, and then we can go back and see if folks have questions. They are in no particular order. We don't prioritize our issues. We love all our children equally, and different issues are in different stages, as you'll hear. So again, no particular order. Vermont 211. Good news here. Vermont 211 funding is in the House budget for 24/7 operations, and at this point, it's in the Senate budget. It was not in the governor's budget, but the legislature so far has chosen to add money to the budget, the base budget, which would mean that the funding would be assumed to be there year after year. Right now, 211 is running partly on one-time funding rather than base funding. So they're going to hopefully convert this to base funding. The one little twist is that they're going to use some global commitment funding for this. So for those of you who are deep in the Medicaid weeds, you'll know that that means that there's a matching component that makes it a little bit less expensive for the state to do business. However, it means we're reliant on Medicaid funding to make that gap up. So we're a little concerned about the Medicaid program, but we're glad that the legislature is showing strong support for 211. So we'll see how this ends up. But at this point, funding is in the FY26 budget for full 24/7 operations for 211. The lead organization on this is the United Ways of Vermont. I will note that most of our stuff is budget related, and the fate of the budget is very much unknown. There's a lot of gossip, rumor, speculation. Will the governor sign the budget or not? It's probably safe to assume for planning that he will not sign the budget, which means there's going to be a whole long series of negotiations through May and June, because unlike the federal government, the state cannot operate without a budget. We have to have a budget signed by 12:01 a.m. July 1st, or catastrophic things occur to state government. So we have to figure this out somehow or another. But in any event, where we are right now is the legislature is working on their budget. 211 is we hope, going to be in there. So good news on that. Second thing, also good news, a very small request from Empty Arms of Vermont to request for $40,000 in one-time funding to support their programming, which provides peer support for families suffering losses in pregnancy or in the first year after birth. They do incredible work. Again, it's all peer counseling, peer support, and this would be a small amount of money to support their program as it expands and grows to try to meet the need. It's in the House budget. It's tentatively in the Senate budget. One time, 1 year funding. Fingers crossed that will make it all the way through. Third item is a campaign that we're a part of, the Fund Vermont's Future campaign to increase state revenues by increasing taxes on the wealthiest Vermonters, and specifically on incomes over $500,000. This is a dynamic developing situation because of what's happening at the federal level. At this point, there is no change in tax policy being contemplated. The idea would be, at least one idea is to have a surcharge on very, very high incomes to ask those who do extremely well to give a little bit back to the state to help with core functions of state government. There is no specific proposal yet in any of the constructs, but the speculation is that if there is a large tax cut in the federal tax policy, then there may be action taken by the state to attempt to recoup some of that money that is going out to very wealthy people and to pull it back into state coffers. The current speculation is that high income people will benefit to a tune of $53,000 a year if the Trump tax cuts, as they're referred to, were to go through as currently proposed. So that's all an open question, but there's nothing quite yet determined about that. Next topic is doulas and Medicaid coverage for doula services. There's a bill that's moving along through the process on that. It's I forgot the bill number. Anyway, sorry about that. It passed the Senate. The bill would set up the process to get all the paperwork and all the Medicaid approvals in place so that on July 1st, 2026, doulas who wanted to go through a certification process could bill Medicaid for their services. So it's voluntary certification, not required, and only for doulas who want to provide services to Medicaid eligible families and charge Medicaid for those services. The bill right now is in the House. The House has a lot of support for the bill. We're very confident, but there's some twists and turns to the legislative process. And so the bill is awaiting full examination by the House Healthcare Committee. But we're cautiously optimistic that the bill will get all the way through this year. And again, it's the administrative part of the process. If everything works out, we wouldn't have Medicaid coverage until a year from this July, and we will need to come back next year to get the funding in place. So it's not quite all the way across the finish line, but a lot of progress in getting Medicaid coverage available for folks who are birthing and want to use a doula. So that's very good. Next topic is tax credits. The governor, somewhat to folks' surprise, had in his budget a proposal to extend tax credits in the anti-poverty tax credit world. So child tax credit, earned income tax credit. Those proposals did not match the larger set of proposals that the coalition led by Public Assets Institute is pushing for, but they're not bad. So the coalition is continuing to push for more consideration of this topic, while at the same time sort of begrudgingly supporting the governor's proposals, which were included in the House budget. We'll see if they're in the Senate budget. And that conversation on that topic continues. Again, earned income tax credit and child tax credit, two very successful anti-poverty tools. We want to expand them as much as we can. A modest expansion in the governor's budget. We'll see if that makes it through the process. I'm going to skip over childcare because you're going to hear more about that momentarily. Reach Up advocacy continues, led by Voices for Vermont's Children, to improve the Reach Up benefit. I think, as folks know, the benefit is woefully inadequate. And unfortunately, the governor and the legislature continue to take savings from the program because of projected enrollment declines and sweeping that money out of the program and down to the bottom line to just go to the general fund instead of improving the Reach Up benefit. The House Human Services Committee has been very supportive of doing something about this problem. The rest of the legislature has not. So we're continuing to try to get any kind of increase possible to the Reach Up benefit, but there isn't anything in the budget at this point, nothing in the House budget, and we'll see if we can make something happen in the Senate. I think it's not likely, but advocacy on that continues. Next is funding for Building Bright Futures, our hosts for today's meeting. They have been asking for additional funding to support all of their work, including especially the advising they do with the legislature and the administration. A strong proposal was made in the House, but it was not included in the House budget. And so similar efforts are underway right now in the Senate to try to get it into the Senate budget. We're looking at $332,000 of additional funding to support BBF operations, and advocacy is underway on that front. The budget is tight, but advocacy continues, and one must be hopeful in this game. Similarly, the Parent-Child Center Network was looking for funds from the Tobacco Settlement Fund to enhance their work doing tobacco cessation efforts in their 15 member organizations. The proposal was not included in the House budget. Advocacy is continuing in the Senate. And just the other day, Senator Westman said he was particularly positive about this proposal and indicated that he might be pushing to include it in the final Senate budget. We'll see whether that happens. But again, advocacy continues on this front, and the Parent-Child Center folks are in the State House trying to secure support for their proposal. Again, that's $500,000 for tobacco cessation activities from the Tobacco Cessation Fund, not the general fund. Two more things. One, Children's Integrated Services. As I mentioned, we're the lead organization on that because there is no state association of CIS. So the Alliance steps in to do that. Same kind of storyline here. Advocacy was undertaken. The House Human Services Committee was supportive of the idea of additional funding to CIS, which is underfunded, which has per member per month expenses that exceed the current rate. But unfortunately, there was no additional funding in the House budget. Advocacy continues in the Senate to try to secure perhaps $450,000 to increase the rate from $650 to $675. The latest study showed that the actual cost was $738 per member per month. So a gap of $88, trying to reduce that gap by $25 would cost $450,000. Skeptical that this will happen, but we continue to push in the legislature for this with the hope of, if not getting increased funding this year, perhaps we might get it next year. It's important to take the long view when doing advocacy. It's tough sledding, so we have to keep working at it. Finally, housing, which is a huge issue that I'm not even going to try to summarize in any meaningful way. Suffice it to say, there are all sorts of proposals out there to do lots of different things, most of which are good and most of which don't come anywhere near doing what needs to be done. There's lots of proposals for increased funding for housing development and supporting housing and housing services. The real hot point, as I think people know, is the hotel motel program and emergency housing. We do not have enough emergency housing in the state. We have a transition problem. The problem is we don't have places for people to go. We're doing a pretty good job of getting people into shelter, and then they have no place to go because there are no affordable apartments for them to move into. This is very different than 5 or 10 years ago when the average length of stay in shelters was relatively modest. Now people get stuck in a shelter and cannot leave because there's no place for them to go. That is essentially the holdup for the hotel motel program. The governor has insisted on trying to end this program, even though it is by far and away the most cost-effective way to assist these families and help them get on a better path. The notion that this is a failed program is completely false. It is not a failed program. It's actually an enormously successful program, and it's a crime that, frankly, the legislature has not done a better job of defending it. But they are trying to keep the program going as much as they can and have agreed to essentially go to war with the administration over it. So far, the administration is winning in that they have insisted that the program should be smaller. But we were successful in getting children, families with children, to be included in the temporary extension of the program through June 30. So in the battle over what families should be eligible to stay in the hotel motel program over these last 3 months of the fiscal year, there was a provision for families with young children to be allowed to stay in the program for longer periods of time, which is a good thing. Other populations were not afforded that, and that's a crime. So the legislature has very much engaged in this issue. Amelia, I appreciate your comment in the chat. There's a lot of different pieces of this, and it's a very difficult situation. And the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee are wrestling with an impossible situation. There's no easy way out of this, and there isn't enough funding to do everything that needs to be done. So I acknowledge that it's a very, very challenging situation for sure. And so the negotiations continue on what to do about this. The legislature has a lot of very strong proposals that we support for putting together a very strong program for the next fiscal year that we are very much supporting, and we hope that they will pass. The question is, what will the governor do with these proposals? So very much to be determined when it comes to what's going to happen with the world of emergency housing in the future. So that's the end of my very quick go around. I'm happy to answer questions and to explore any of these issues further. And Amelia, I just want to acknowledge if there's something that I said that you feel like is inaccurate, I'd be happy to try to correct it or engage with you in a conversation either here or another way to make sure that what I'm saying is factually correct.
I can correct one point, and I can state what it was I was disagreeing about. If Sherry, you want me to do that now, I can, or I can talk to Matt
Yes.
another time.
Sure. No,
Great.
go for it.
I think in your excitement and your very good way of trying to get information out really fast, there was something that I heard you say that I disagreed with, which was putting all the legislature together in terms of how they are addressing that they're not doing enough. And as you know very well, this was the governor who said, I have a plan, and they've been waiting for his plan, and he's never given a plan. And when he says I have a plan and they show up at the table, he does not show up.
Right.
So I just want to say that it's not the entire legislature. They are behind it. We have a majority of progressives in our legislature. So it's just the way that you stated it. But I know you're on board with me with that.
Well,
know you
I think, Amelia, let me be clear. The one thing that I was saying that I want to be very clear about, and yeah, it's kind of a strident thing to say. I think that the leadership of the legislature could have and should have done a better job of saying that that the hotel motel program is not a failure. And I'm talking
Okay.
specifically about the leadership. I'm not talking about most members because they
Mhm.
don't have that microphone.
Okay.
I'm saying that they could have done more to push back against the administration's characterization of the hotel motel program as a failure. That is the only thing that I was being critical about, and I apologize if it sounded broader than that.
No, you clarified that perfectly and made your point, and I think it's an opinion that could be, it would be great to have a debate about that with leadership to see
Indeed.
maybe what was behind the curtain, keeping them from saying what they could say. My second point is, and I'm quoting here, in terms of taxing the most wealthy Vermonters, nobody is talking about that this year. We tried that last year, and the most you would raise is 70 million. Not a large amount in a $9 billion budget. So that's a direct quote from my husband, who is on the Appropriations Committee, and that is his, which has come up again and again and again, and also with the Ways and Means Committee. It's not as much as we think. We're not Connecticut, we're not Massachusetts, we're not New Hampshire. We don't have that many people that have that much money.
Right. So the proposals that are being discussed at this point would be for a larger amount of money because the change in the tax policy on the federal level, if that were to happen, would sort of change the playing field. And so if that were to happen, then there are things that the state could do that would be more that would yield more of a return by changing the tax policy. But it's a very obviously it's a very controversial issue, and it's all part of the very strange, convoluted situation that we may end up in, depending on what happens with the federal budget and tax policy. So there's a lot of unknowns there as we look ahead and consider different possibilities.
Right. And no legislator is going to want to raise taxes because we lost 17 legislators this session because of taxes. So that's where we're at right now. And that's why the governor has all the power that he has now. We don't have a veto override anymore. So that's where the power lands because of property taxes. Anyway, I'll be done. Thank you for letting me pitch in, Sherry. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm gonna shift now to Sarah Kinney from Let's Grow Kids for our next update.
Hi, y'all. Sherry. It's nice to see you all, and I'm sorry I had to miss Cynthia's presentation because I was busy in the State House and care deeply about both of us. So anyway, it's nice to see you all. I am going to actually tag team a little with Beth Wallace from Vermont AYC because there is a lot in motion in the State House related to childcare specifically right now. So I will give quick updates on H454, the Education Transformation Bill as it relates to childcare universal pre-K. And then we can talk a little bit about the 26 budget and then H248, which is a House bill that's going to be on the move soon. And then Beth can talk a little bit about S119, the bill to recognize early childhood education as a profession in the state. So I'm going to start with the biggest thing in the State House right now, which is H454, the Education Transformation Bill that the House is poised to vote on in the next week. The House Education Committee has been working on it for a long time, and then the Ways and Means Committee did some work on it last week, and it's with appropriations, and then it's going to be headed to the House floor. That bill, as you have likely heard, makes a ton of changes to the public education system in Vermont. And the pest control people are here. Sorry. To deal with the squirrels in the attic of our office. So to pay no mind to the flashlights behind me. The bills will make, would make sweeping changes. The governor's proposal was would make changes on a really fast timeline. The House proposal slows things down quite significantly and sort of phases things in over the next few years. I'm not going to talk at length about the bill itself because I don't know all the details. It is not my area of policy expertise, but I did want to highlight that the Ways and Means Committee this week added language into the bill that would ask the Joint Fiscal Office to do an analysis over the summer and bring back to legislative committees some information for them about all funding streams for early childhood education, including universal pre-K and child care financial assistance program. And I think they're also asking them to analyze all the tax credits that families with children are eligible for. And I've asked JFO to report on considerations for changing those funding streams to align with the bill's education transformation initiatives. And that language is a little bit vague. But so we will be paying attention to that as the bill makes its way through the Senate, where it will likely change dramatically. And then, there's a long way to go for this bill still. But they are not making any changes to universal pre-K in the bill at this juncture anyway, but are asking the Joint Fiscal Office to do some analysis because the way the House has structured the bill, there's a lot of analysis that will be happening over the next several months, groups going away and drafting plans and bringing them back so the legislature would be poised to take action on new funding formulas and new school district boundaries and other things in January when they come back for the second half of the legislative biennium. So that's what's happening with universal pre-K in that bill anyway. And there has been no other action on universal pre-K this year. What I have heard from a handful of legislators is that they're trying to curtail education spending right now, so it is not the moment to be expanding universal pre-K. So anyway, we'll be keeping a close eye on that, and if that language does pass, then obviously we'll be keeping a very close eye and trying to make sure that the Joint Fiscal Office had all the necessary information to do that analysis accurately. There's another small bill that I'll talk about first before we talk about the state budget, which is H248. So this is a bill that makes some adjustments to the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. And these are adjustments that were requested by the administration in response to new federal rules, not this administration's federal rules, but the previous administration's federal rules. They were good rules that would provide more access to families. And so those would require that the state, one of the big changes in that bill would require that the state pay childcare programs who are participating in CCFAP, that the reimbursement rates that the state pays to programs would need to be paid prospectively, so before the service is offered, as opposed to the reimbursement base payment system that we have now. So they would need to be paid prospectively and on an enrollment-based system as opposed to the attendance-based system that we have right now. So that's sort of the key change. And then the bill would also allow the Child Development Division to do contract for childcare spaces with programs specific. I mean, they could do it for a number of different reasons, but I think they're looking specifically at for contracting spaces for children with disabilities or special needs. So that the House Human Services Committee has that bill. They did just a very basic overview of the bill, and then they're planning in the next week or two to dive more deeply into it and take more testimony. That bill would not likely pass this year. I think the plan is for them to move it through the House this year, and then the Senate would take it up in January again when the legislature reconvenes. As we've said, the legislature operates on a biennium, lest any of us forget. So this is the first year of the biennium, and anything that doesn't pass this year is still alive next year to be moved forward. So those are those two bills. And then the big action right now is on the childcare front anyway, is in the state budget conversation, and then also in the bill that the Senate Government Operations Committee is considering right now to create the Profession of Early Childhood Education. So on the budget, the state budget that was introduced by the governor, his budget proposal would have cut funding for base funding for childcare in the state budget for FY26. And this is due to the fact that the consensus forecast, so the legislature and the administration have their own economists, and every year they come together and they do forecasts for the state about what they think the revenues are going to look like for the state. And when they looked at the revenues that they anticipate through the payroll tax, which was put into place in Act 76 to fund the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, that funding from the payroll tax all goes into the Child Care Contribution Special Fund. And the economists, when they were analyzing what the revenues might be in that fund in the coming years, they predicted $19 million additional revenue coming into that special fund beyond what was appropriated in the budget last year. Act 76 very clearly allocated increased general fund dollars, base general fund dollars for childcare going forward, and then also the revenue from the payroll tax. That's the funding structure. It's coming from two separate places. Because the economists are forecasting additional funding in the special fund this year, we would argue that's fantastic. That means that we can take further steps in Act 76, as we're always intended, that we continue to make incremental increases each year in the reimbursement rates paid to programs and eligibility for families and the supports to programs and supporting the early childhood workforce. There's a lot still to be done, right, to solve our childcare crisis. The governor, however, said, great, $19 million extra. So he moved basically expenses from the general fund into the special fund and proposed to cut $19 million from the base general fund dollars for childcare. The legislature was unimpressed with that idea, and the House, the budget that just passed the House recently, the Appropriations Committee and the Human Services Committee worked hard to try to figure out how to hold on to as many of those $19 million as they could. The Human Services Committee actually recommended preserving all $19 million for childcare purposes. The Appropriations Committee, through their deliberations, held on to just under $5 million of it, and they allocated those funds to go specifically to increase reimbursement rates for infant and toddler spaces. And that's would be a 4.5% increase in the reimbursement rates being paid to programs on behalf of families for infants and toddlers, which is better than losing $19 million. But luckily, the Senate feels quite strongly that we need to hold on to more of those funds, that really the full $19 million should be preserved for childcare. The payroll tax was increased specifically to fund childcare. or was created specifically to fund childcare. So the Senate Appropriations Committee is working on the budget right now. They've entered their sort of final stages of their deliberations on the budget. And the Senate President Pro Tem Phil Baruth is working on a sort of a package package proposal to bring to the Appropriations Committee of how to reinvest those $90 million into childcare, including increasing reimbursement rates. But we have also suggested a suite of other investments that will be really important to make sure that Act 76 works long-term and that we are growing the early childhood education workforce. So I can talk more about what some of those are. We won't know whether any of them are accepted until next week, probably. So there's still a lot of conversation to go in the next couple of weeks in Senate Appropriations. And so we'll see. Hopefully they'll be able to preserve even more of those funds. We're also proposing that they use some of those funds to create a reserve fund in the special fund so that we have a little bit of a buffer in case of federal disaster, which seems more and more likely by the day in terms of federal disaster, in terms of federal funding. And also, if we are all successful and utilization of the Child Care Financial Assistance Program increases dramatically in the future, we need to know that we have a reserve available for that. So that's the latest on the budget discussions. Wherever the Senate lands, hopefully they'll come in a little higher in terms of preserving those childcare dollars, and then the budget bill will go to a conference committee of 3 House members and 3 Senate members from the appropriations committees, and they'll hash out all the differences. And then, as Matt said, the budget will go to the governor, and it's anybody's guess right now, although signs are the magic 8 balls pointing towards veto at this moment. And we'll see what happens in the coming weeks here. And then do we want to do questions about all that and then turn it over to Beth to talk about S119? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, Sarah. Does anyone have questions for Sarah?
And I'm sorry, I watch a lot
And
of legislative hearings on YouTube at 1.5 speed, so I talk really fast this time of year too, so apologies.
And it is a lot to follow, so don't feel bad about asking any question.
Exactly.
A quick question, both you and Matt have suggested that the signs, reading the tea leaves suggesting that the governor may not sign the budget. Are there particular things in the budget that he has publicly signaled that he is opposed to? Or is it just the general, I don't have to, so I'm not going to, that he's sort of taken this year?
Yeah, Diane, that would be a terrible thing for everybody if I were speaking, if you were listening to me at 1.5 speed. Matt, go. I mean, I think the emergency housing provisions are a thing, but I also think basically anything that is not what was in the governor's budget seems these days to be triggering a like it's my way or the highway sort of approach. But hopefully that'll change.
Yeah, the emergency housing piece is going to be a sticking point. It's a tiny piece in a much larger budget. The legislative strategy is to wrap various items into the budget in terms of the language and the funding. So the education reimagining proposal will be wrapped into the budget in different ways, and that's a huge sticking point.
Universal school meals funding, which the governor zeroed out. The legislature is committed to reinstating, and also the child care dollars. There's a lot that he may be taking issue with.
And I'm sure that if you looked in different issue areas, you'd find other things as well. Energy policy, potentially housing policy. So there are sticking points in many places. I think the general sticking point, as Sarah said, is that they haven't quite figured out yet how to try to come to some agreement. I mean, look what happened with the Budget Adjustment Act. The legislature came up with, well, the governor made a proposal. The legislature came up with an alternative. They argued about it. The legislature tried to make some movement. It wasn't good enough. And the governor vetoed it, and they couldn't figure out how to come to any kind of agreement. So that's a bad precedent in terms of figuring out how to get to some sort of place where the governor will sign something, because the governor is not, it's not, the negotiations aren't happening yet. So it's not clear how, Martha, it really is not clear how this is going to resolve itself.
The other just sort of a big picture thing to keep in mind, and Matt mentioned this as well, is there's just, it feels like the entire budget creation exercise is entirely theoretical this year, because we're all just waiting for the rug to be ripped out from underneath us at any moment on a whole host of different federal programs. And the state budget, I think I heard this week, is 36% comprised of federal funds. So, you know, as the congressional budget deliberations continue this summer, they'll need to pass a budget by September. So the legislature is sort of, they have to go through the mechanics of creating a state budget, but they're also like, they're saying, we'll put this funding here, but then if we lose all of our Medicaid dollars or a big chunk of our Medicaid dollars, all bets are off, which is sort of how we're approaching the conversation about the childcare funds as well. It's like, this is what we should do. And we all know that if suddenly we have a 30% hole in our state budget, like everything gets thrown up in the air and lands differently.
Which is why the conversations about tax policy are totally up in the air. For example, and the way that things were understood last year look very different this year. Notwithstanding the political context, as was pointed out, which is also something that is part of the conversation in the building.
Thanks. I think we'll shift to Beth. There she is, Beth Wallace.
Hi, Beth Wallace, Director for Engagement at Vermont AUIC. Hopefully this can be a little a happier note following all of that news about the federal budget and other challenges. And I'm going to share my screen just to mix it up a little bit. Here we go. Apologies for folks who are at the Higher Ed Consortium and have already seen this. There are a couple of changes, so see if you can spot them. So S119 and H182, same bill. This is a bill that establishes the early childhood education profession regulated by Office for Professional Regulation, OPR. And based on their recommendations, just kind of catch up again. If you haven't heard about this before, Vermont AUIC submitted an application, a Sunrise application for review to the OPR office back in, I don't even know what season we're in now. It was a while ago. I think it was last spring. And then OPR took that up. It was their job to review that application and then conduct their own research, including taking public comment at that time, and then to issue their recommendations. So at that time, we really didn't know what they would decide, what they would recommend. They issued a report early January of this year, and ta-da, their recommendations aligned with the recommendations of Vermont AUIC as sourced over several years from the workforce itself. Just to let you know, the way that OPR operates is sometimes they choose to recommend regulating a profession, most times because the legislature directs them to research a profession and come up with a recommendation, or you can submit an application with your own research and reasoning and ask them to look at that. And that's where this really started, because we wanted this regulation to come from the workforce and really have a say in that process. So we're really glad that the recommendations that came out of OPR closely align with those of the workforce, and that those recommendations align at the workforce, the state, and the national levels, because this has been a national effort for some years as well. This is a quick visual on what was in the OPR Sunrise application. those workforce, again, recommendations, and then what that looks like in S119, H182. I'll just go back and remind folks that H182 was introduced in the House Government Operations Committee first, and then it kind of sat there because they were inundated with education reform and everything else happening around the state. So then the Senate Government Operations Committee is the committee that ended up taking it up and taking testimony in this bill. Just we have found that this visual is really helpful for folks. A lot of questions that we've been getting from the field and from others are about the rulemaking process and kind of processes and procedures and things that won't be addressed until rulemaking. So the legislation, the bill, stands up the profession. It says, yes, this is a recognized profession that should be regulated by the Office of Professional Regulation. And then it creates a governing board. Much like nursing has their own standards board, and they have that LNA, LPN, RN. Early childhood education would also have a standalone board. It's a complex field. Everybody on the screen knows that we are a complex field. And one of the things that I personally was really relieved and happy about was that OPR recognized those complexities and the nuances and said, yes, unlike many of our other professions that are just regulated by OPR, we think this field deserves to have its own board, primarily made up of people from the field. And so rulemaking happens once that governing board is stood up and those folks start to hash out the details. So again, a lot of questions that we're getting right now have to do with those details that will happen during rulemaking, and there will be a whole other opportunity to inform that rulemaking once it's stood up. So last slide here, just kind of history and what's next. The initial read through was Wednesday, March 19th of the bill in Senate Government Operations Committee. It feels like much longer ago than that, and it feels like just yesterday. Since then, OPR, Vermont AOIC, early childhood educators from all settings, higher education staff, AOE, and the Vermont NEA have all provided testimony. More testimony will be taken this afternoon. But we are hoping and expecting that testimony will conclude this week. If this S119 moves out of committee, you won't see S119 again. It will likely be added to H472, which is a larger OPR bill. So that could be a little confusing to folks if you don't see that S119 has passed out of committee. It doesn't mean that it's not going anywhere. It will go to the House next. Any questions?
Hi, Beth. I just want to first say thanks and cheers. And there was a Vermont AYC email that came through my inbox this morning, maybe from Rachel Hunter. There was a graphic at the bottom that was facts and myths or something like that. That is stuff that I've seen circulating in the space. And I think if there's an opportunity for that to leave just an email and be put into a graphic that can also circulate, I think that'd be super helpful, and keep me posted if it does. I'm happy to share.
Thanks, Alyssa. And in that email, if you clicked the graphic, it was brought to you. You can download the PDF, and
Okay.
I will share that now so everybody understands what we're talking about. One of the things that happened is that some misinformation was shared across the field through email and on some closed Facebook groups. And so we thought that it was helpful and really wanted to make sure that everybody was well informed with factual information to pick out those pieces that were inaccurate and misleading, and then to provide the facts there. So this is the graphic that Alyssa was talking about.
And Beth, can you put that link to that graphic in the chat maybe?
I sure can. Tell me if you can't access it through this link.
Okay. Are there, before we shift to BBF, are there any other questions for Beth or any other advocacy leaders here that want to tag team that at all or share any other updates regarding where we are at this point before we turn to Martha? Okay, all right, Martha.
Yeah, before I get started, I'm gonna invite Kate, who's our network coordinator, to do a brief update on one of the other VCAP committee meetings that happened last week that touched on some of these conversations about federal funding. So Kate, are you here?
Thanks, Martha. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate, the network manager for Building Bright Futures. And last week's Child Outcomes Accountability Team meeting or COAT meeting, we had Ashley Berliner, who's a Medicaid policy director, and Ivy from Hunger Free Vermont talked to us about potential federal changes coming at the federal Medicaid and federal SNAP policy. So I'll just put that recording in the chat for anybody who wants to view that. Thanks, Martha.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do just in the next 10 minutes or so is share highlights of a presentation I've been giving in regional council meetings, updating our regional councils about the policy issues that we're monitoring this year, but you all heard much more detailed, much more in-depth summaries. And so I'm kind of going to skip to the end of that and mostly share with you all a tool that we are using and that we are going to invite all of you to use to monitor some of these things as they evolve. So I'm going to share my desktop and you all see this cutie patootie in the heart sweatshirt. Get her into slideshow view. There we go. So
Martha, we don't, oh, there we go. There it is. Okay. Yes.
So just to kind of take a step back and just get located in our role. So Building Bright Futures, we do not endorse any specific policy or bill. Rather, we sort of monitor the system and advise decision makers as they are making decisions about specific things. So here we are, Building Bright Futures role. We convene partners just like we're doing today. We monitor the system through high quality, up-to-date data. We elevate the voices of families and professionals as best we can, respond to emerging needs, and then advise the governor, administration, and legislature. As everybody has spoken to today, that's a hard thing to do in a climate such as this, but we do our best to say what is the information that you need to make the decisions that you need to make, using data to inform policy. So the tool, hopefully you're familiar with our website, but the tool that I wanted to share with everybody today is a legislative tracking process called Quorum. Quorum is a national public affairs monitoring database that tracks legislation at the federal level and across all 50 states. We subscribe to the Vermont package, so this allows us to identify the bills that we want to be tracking through the legislative session and put those on a publicly facing data tracking sheet on our website. The other, if you want to grab your phone and pull up these QR codes, they're live. In just a minute, I'm going to switch out of this screen and take you to the website so we can look at it ourselves. Before I do that, I will just say that this legislative tracking tool is meant to be just that, another tool in our arsenal. As you've heard today, things in the building change very quickly. It's impossible for a spreadsheet to capture all of the nuances of what's going on in a committee room. So we're really hopeful that our partners and members of our network are using this as another tool in their toolkit, but are still reaching out to Matt and to Let's Grow Kids and to all the other lead agencies in the building when you want to weigh in on a particular thing or with your legislator. So how do you get to this tracker? And then I'm going to just show you where some of the bills that we've talked about today appear. So this is BBF's homepage. You're going to go to our Data and Policy Center. You're going to go to our Policy tab. and you're going to go to our quorum legislative tracker. That's going to bring you to this landing page, describes a little bit about what the tool is. We have 2 tracking sheets. One is more specifically related to those policy areas that the BBF network and State Advisory Council has policy recommendations in the current year. The second sheet is a broader look at policy issue areas that relate to the full VCAP or the strategic plan priority areas. I'm going to take us first into the policy recommendation related legislation and just point out the bills that we've talked about here so far today. So starting with, as you guys have heard, there's kind of been 3 big themes in the building this year. One is the governor's education transformation. One is the housing crisis, and one is what is happening with the federal budget, right? And so you'll see those pop up here. H91, this is the bill that is the emergency housing assistance that would replace what's referred to as the hotel motel program. This is the bill that comes from House Human Services that seeks to replace the general assistance emergency housing program that we currently have. So just to describe how this sheet works, you see in this column the number of the bill. The second tab are the issues. This is a tab where we're assigning it to the issues that we're tracking. So hopefully that makes sense, but it's not, it may not universally be super self-explanatory, but you can see housing basic needs, paid family leave. We highlight the general policy recommendation area that it fits to. This third column, you can see the status of the bill. This bill has passed the original chamber, and it is referred to the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare. Again, this is a column. These 2 will give you an overview, give you a sense, so that when you pick up the phone and call Matt, or you pick up the phone and call Sarah, you can say, hey, I see this bill, looks like it's in this committee. Can you tell me more? Because I guarantee you there's always more. There's always more detail. There's always more nuance, but this will give you a snapshot of where it is. This next column, the source link, this will actually take you to the state's website. So you can see the state's landing page for this bill, who the sponsors are, again, where it is, its last recorded action, and then the detailed status down here. So this is helpful. I will say these 2 are generally in lockstep. If you're really, really quick, the committee rooms update this website a little bit faster than quorum. So if there's discrepancy between what quorum's page says and what this says, it's because something has happened in the building in the last 8 hours, and quorum will catch up with it soon. This next column is maybe the most useful to those of us that don't spend our whole lives in the building. It's the AI summary of the bill. Just gives you the highlight reel of what is contained in this bill, and then the rest of the columns are the committees that it's been to and the dates and the sponsors. So as I said, housing is moving in H91. There's also a bill moving in the Senate right now related to housing, S127. This speaks to more of the medium term housing entities like the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, rental housing revolving loan program. As Matt said, we could spend a whole day talking about all the different pieces of housing that are moving. I think the high level at BBF that we're trying to understand are kind of the 3 buckets: the emergency housing response. We know we need roofs over people's heads and beds to sleep in. We also know that we're not going to solve the homelessness problem without more beds to sleep in and more roofs to put over people's heads. So there's a long-term investment in building more housing and keeping our housing available to families that need it. A lot of the longer-term investments sit in the budget. So I'll talk about the budget next. And then there's kind of a medium term in housing solutions that we're following, which are the services around transitional housing. So when a family does move from unsheltered homelessness into housing, that they have the supports that they need in order to maintain that housing and stay housed and not be a revolving door. The other thing on this sheet that I honestly just added this morning to this sheet is adding H454, which is what Sarah spoke to with the education transformation bill. I had not been tracking that in our policy recommendations because we generally don't track K through 12 policy. However, the pre-K study committee, JFO, has been tasked with, has been added to that version of that bill. So it has joined our tracker as part of our universal pre-K tracking process. I will wrap that up on this sheet and I'll go to our broader VCAP priorities sheet. You see here, this is where the budget shows up, H493. This is the current budget bill that is moving past the House, is in Senate appropriations. Here's the link to where that lives on the State House page. The other bill that I will two other bills that I'll draw your attention to here is S119. This is the Legislature of Early Childhood Educators that we just heard about from Beth. You can track its progress here. I will, as soon as it gets added to that other bill, I will add that other bill to our tracker. I believe it said it was H472. So we'll keep our eye on that and make sure that we don't lose track of this important piece as it moves through the system. And there's something else that I was going to share. Oh, the doula, S53, the doula bill is also moving. And I believe it is back in House Healthcare. Yep. So it is back in House Healthcare, just kind of waiting for its next step. As I'm looking at my notes, I'll just pause and say, are there other specific bills that people would like to see or touch on? I will say the trickiest from a tracking perspective, there is so much contained in you know, the H489, this was budget adjustment. So we're done with that one. That's the one that's been vetoed 3 times. We're looking at H493, this act related to appropriations for the support of government. These are probably the hardest ones to follow from this quorum page just because there are so many issues contained in the budget. And so just another example of this is a great and useful tool for those of us that are trying to understand what's going on in the building from a distance. But it's no substitute for that direct line of communication with these folks who are in day-to-day communication with our lawmakers. I will pause there and invite any discussion.
So does anyone have any questions for Martha? That was helpful. I think last month Anna showed us the tool and walked us through, and it was helpful to do the review and see sort of what we talked about today and you know, how you could utilize that. So thank you, Martha, for that. That was helpful. And Becca has a question.
I have more of a statement, and Martha heard me say this in a meeting earlier this week. If you haven't checked out the tool, it is amazing. It is all things Martha said and more. So as somebody who tries to track so many of the issues at the same time and easily gets overwhelmed and could spend my entire day doing it, it's a great tool.
Anyone else have questions? Oh, Amelia?
Audio. Thanks for that great report, Martha. Just wanted to let everybody know that when we are asked to click here for an electronic communication with our legislators, sometimes we see those go out. Those automatically land in legislator spam folders. Now, unless they are trolling their spam folders and really want to see what you have to say, that the copied, it's really best to send an email directly, or you can always send a message. You can contact the Sergeant of Arms and have a message sent directly to legislators as well. But just keep that in mind when you're designing an action, that those things do land in spam.
That is sometimes true, Amelia, although just this morning there was a lot of complaining in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee about how many emails they've been getting. On
Well,
one
were those
issue that we just triggered yesterday through a form, yeah.
were
So they're getting
those
through.
were those the electronic ones that you automatically sign and go through?
Yeah.
All right, Sarah. Well, I'm going to call Mike right now and tell him you're giving me false information. There's stuff landing in your
yeah.
inbox and you're ignoring it.
It may depend also on the, like, how it's being sent. We've done a lot of back end work on our systems to make sure
That's
that
what
they
you
get
have
through
to
the
do.
spam
You-
filters.
yeah. Absolutely. Well, good for you. Let's go,
Legislature
kids.
does have aggressive spam filters, that's for sure.
Good for
Good.
you.
I appreciate that point, and I think I just would add it. We're headed into a really challenging time. The last month of the legislative session, last couple of months of legislation on a great year. It gets a little heated, it gets a little intense, and this year that is only going to be amplified. And so I think this where from, you know, the desk that I sit at and monitoring these sheets every day, we really just we want to make sure that people have access to up-to-date, accurate information, and that we are so we're trying to keep that timely, we're trying to keep it accurate, and you know, so that as these conversations develop over the next few weeks and months, that we are grounded in reality and in fact, and not in fear and overwhelm. So that's this tiny slice of we hope to be offering to the space at this time.
I just want to add in one more plug, Sherry, if I may, too, that I jumped in to say that your emails do go through. Amelia's right that it's always better to send a like personalized direct email to a legislator, more likely that it goes through and more likely that they'll read it. And I just want to, I feel like, especially right now, given everything that's happening in the world, we can feel really powerless. And it can feel like, why bother? Our voices aren't even being heard. And I just want to reassure people that legislators, when your email does get through to them, that those contacts do make a difference. I think people are always like, they're not going to read it anyway, or like, that doesn't matter if they get 4 or 12 emails or 1. It totally makes a difference. And I every day see in the State House the impact that contacts from constituents have. And I just want to reassure people that like your actions do make a difference. Just last week, I saw a bill go from stuck on the wall to suddenly they got like 3 emails, the legislator got about it, and it suddenly became a priority for them. So those contacts do make a difference, even though you may feel like you're just sending out your thoughts into the ether.
Yeah, and I can back that up firsthand. We are on vacation and he is responding to things. Also, the education bill that is being presented on the floor today, the House is responding because of the votes for property taxes. I mean, that was heard loud and clear. So you're absolutely right, Sarah. There are many initiatives that happen because, well, they look at you, everybody, as the experts, right? They know they're not the experts. They have to go out and get the information from you and from advocates. So absolutely, the more they hear from you, the better, actually.
Any other questions, or also if there's any other updates that that anyone from the meeting would like to share, just general updates or any impacts, you know, that funding is affecting right now for the organizations that you're working for or people you're working with. We can open up now to talk about some of those things. All right. If there are no other updates or questions, I think the position we're in is we're under threat of a lot of things, but I think Martha's reminder to try to stay based in reality is important, because it can just be too overwhelming to think of all that could, right? So thank you everyone for attending the meeting. This was a great meeting. Thank you to our advocacy partners for all the great updates, a lot happening. We'll keep it updated. And I just wanted to say, next month we are having the follow-up presentation from Heather Duhamel on the landscape analysis she did of higher education post-secondary pathways. And she's going to be joined by Leslie Johnson from CCV. We will also hear from First Children's Finance from the survey they did on the state of childcare businesses. And we are going to get an update from CDD on the Strengthening Families program that they're working on. So that's next month. Thank you everyone. And you get about 16 minutes back in your day. I'll see you next month.
Thanks, everybody.